Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Patton. I'm the head of government affairs for the U.S. at Springer Nature. I'll be moderating the panel today on strategies for driving the transition to a culture of open science, what works and what doesn't. I'm joined by panelist Jonathan Peters from Virginia Tech University Libraries. He's the Associate Director of Data Management and Curation Services, Daniel Hook, who's the CEO for Digital Science, and Erica Pastrana, the Editorial Director of Nature Research Journals from Springer Nature. So what I'm going to do is quickly present the results from a few recent surveys and reports to set the stage for our discussion, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. So I want to thank Mark Hannell, who's the Vice President of Open Research at Digital Science, for allowing us to share some of his preliminary slides on a report which was upcoming at the time of this recording. So the QR code is here if you want to download the report, and I'll also be putting the link in the chat. So in this new report, Figshare, Digital Science, and Springer Nature have tracked whether researchers are making their data openly available and to what standard, with a view to better understand the real motivations for data sharing and ultimately affect change. So in this graph, this is using data from this Chan Zuckerberg initiative, which includes over 8 million data citations from both DOI and non-DOI sources, such as extension IDs. You can see this is the percentage of papers with a link to a data set, and it's kind of the longer term view from 2000 to 2022. And you can really see a pretty remarkable uptick. It might be difficult to see on your screen, but each line represents a different country. You can see Botswana is leading the way, but United Kingdom, China, and the United States are pretty closely behind. This next graph is a little bit shorter term that shows kind of the slight flattening at the end of the curve from 2016 to 2022. You can still see that authors are sharing their own data, authors are sharing other data sets. It's the upward trend in data citation and data sharing, but it's not quite as pronounced as that dramatic uptick that we've seen over the last 20 years. So it's generally a positive story we're seeing here, but I think there's still more to be done. And the nice thing about this new report is that it also dug into why authors are reluctant to share. So I think one of the most striking findings is that 9 years in, the main challenges of sharing open data is that authors feel like they're still receiving too little credit. You can see 73% are saying that the work that goes into sharing data is not worth the credit that they get for it. And that's from the State of Open Data survey. We have findings from a different survey that was done on research integrity. This is a survey that's been running for 4 years by Ed Gerstner at Springer Nature. It's generally about research integrity, and there's a lot of interesting findings there. He surveyed researchers from countries around the world. The white paper on this will be available early next year. On data, though, we just wanted to pull out this graph because it was interesting that in the UK, USA, and Australia, 8 of the top 10 most desired topics for further training are related to data. You can see researchers are asking for more guidance on copyright, policies, repositories, and particularly in the US, storage and management strategies. This will be particularly relevant as the OSTP mandates on data sharing start going into effect. So now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll turn to the panelists to start getting their perspective on some of what we're seeing here. So let me turn it over to them. And I'd like to start with asking if there's anything that anyone thinks is kind of surprising or you didn't expect to see on any of these graphs or in these survey results.
Sure, maybe I can start. What I thought was really interesting was, data are really at the core of research. They are, in essence, we spend a significant amount of money, a significant amount of resource on data generating activity as part of the research paradigm. And so on the one hand, you have results coming out of these surveys, which seem to suggest that as little as 9% of papers are actually citing those data, if I understand the graphic correctly. And that means that data are either being used in a single paper and then moved on from, or they are getting lost in the mix. They're not being reused, and we're not making the most efficient use of the data that we're producing and the experiments we're doing potentially. So that feels like a low percentage. And that mixed with the second graph that suggests that people don't feel that they're getting the appropriate amount of credit for the data seems to chime. But again, 73% of researchers not feeling that the expectation of the credit that they should get for this work is actually coming to them suggests a real fundamental problem in the culture that we have in research around this type of activity. I don't know if others disagree with me, but that strikes me as quite a strong evidential result that comes out of these surveys.
Yeah, I agree about on that point, Daniel. It also strikes me. One thing I was reflecting on in that graph is really the shared responsibility that we have in sort of that acknowledgement of credit and what that really means. I mean, I'm wearing the sort of more publisher editorial hat here, but from our perspective, it takes a lot of steps to ensure that paper is properly even citing and recognizing the data set via the permanent identifier and acknowledging it in a reference. So, even the technical aspects, the back end of this is complex and needs certain steps. But I think most publishers have undertaken work in that realm to be ready when an author is willing and able to share to do so. But that's as far as a large part of us tend to go, right? We make sure that data set is there and it's properly hyperlinked and the metadata is correct and the citation is present so it can be cataloged as a shared data set in that sort of fair principles way. But there's much more that we could do as publishers alone, and perhaps the other panelists can comment on what librarians could do or what other institutions could do to acknowledge that credit. But one thing that strikes me is that with papers, for example, we reflect on the measures of impact of that paper very prominently. We report on citations, altmetric scores, downloads, visibility, right? And we promote that paper. However, we do very little to promote the data set that's associated with it in the paper as a platform, but perhaps in other places. So, that's one aspect that I think I personally haven't seen a lot of advance in that, and it's something we should perhaps explore.
Yeah, I'll just add that I mean I totally agree. This is a big challenge and around incentives for doing this. And I think I kind of like the way Daniel was saying, it's like a change in culture would be required. We've gotten researchers have gotten used to looking for prestige or demonstrations of their effectiveness as researchers through peer-reviewed publications, the citations of those publications, through proposal awards, through a certain couple of things. And these things are especially relatively important for faculty members at institutions like mine, like at Virginia Tech, for promotion and tenure, where things and there's a long tradition of these things being important. Data sets, not so much. Sharing software, not so much, or pre-registrations of research plans. These are fairly new things to be incorporated. So we have, as Eric just mentioned, technical challenges. So we're not necessarily have the technical infrastructure set up to make it possible to demonstrate the impact of all these things, but also that researchers are not used to considering these things as first-class research products. And so when they're working with these things, they're thinking about them. Okay, how do I use these things to get myself these publications, to get these presentations to my community, to get more funds for my research? And there has to be a change in this to elevate these research products like data, and then have the ability to invest and create the infrastructure necessary to give it its due credit and make it easier to share and make use of it for all of us, not just for credit for the researchers, but for the betterment of the research enterprise.
Thanks, Jonathan. So along those lines, is there, have you, any of you can talk about from your perspective, a change that was made that could kind of help move the needle? Like trainings, policies specifically. But yeah, like what's happening at your level that you think is making a difference?
Well, maybe to start, I'm kind of the data guy on the call. So, 11 years ago, there was an initiative called Credit, which started out trying to give people more credit for the role that they had played in publication. And it strikes me that a key part of this culture change is actually having the data in place to allow us to understand the different roles that people play. We need to be able to actually value those roles, and we need a basis on which to do that. So I think gone are the days where a publication or an author can be considered to have the idea, write the paper, get the grant, do the experiment, interpret the data, collect data. I mean, this is in football analogy, being English football analogy, it's like asking someone to play midfield, defence, goalie, all at the same time, and that's really challenging. So I think the aim with credit was to kind of debundle that and to try to give people the appropriate credit for their roles. But if we look at the data, there'll be something around 7.5 million, almost 8 million publications published this year, about 7.5 million last year. And the data suggests that around 300,000 of those actually have credit statements in them, which means you're looking at 4%. We've got 4% take up of a data standard and approach that's now been around for more than a decade. And I firmly believe that it is the route to starting changing that culture and getting people recognized. But I'd be really interested in Jonathan and Erica's view, in their different viewpoints. Is credit valuable? Is the reason it's not being taken up that people don't see the value, or is it lack of investment, or what do you think the barrier is? Because from my perspective as a data provider, it's hard to actually get credit information. Some of that involves a bit of data mining and some work on top because people aren't yet adhering to standards. So I'd love to get a bit of a discussion around this because I think it's maybe a starting point.
Yeah, I mean, I want to advocate here for the role, and it is not a solution that gets us to the large scale problem, but I do feel there's a little bit of a snowball effect. The role of an editor in this piece, and of course I would say that as an editorial director, but in my experience, and going back a little bit to the question that Laura also posed and trying to tie it up with yours, Daniel, your answer is, what has worked or what are we doing, in this wider sense. And I have a concrete example in my mind where we have achieved a very robust and efficient data/code sharing results in a journal that we launched specifically with a very intentional focus on that purpose. That was Nature Computational Science. It was launched in 2021. And we recruited a team of editors that obviously the field, perhaps this is where I'll start. There has to be fertile ground for these policies to really flourish, for these initiatives to really make significant roots. So the fertile ground was the computational science community, which we know has embraced open science much before, we publishers or tech people were talking about it. So in that context, a journal such as that was sort of launched with the idea of really following through this idea of proper data sharing, but also that sense of proper credit in the sense of a proper citation for the unique objects, so be it the code or the data or both combined, a proper citation, a proper data or code availability statement where there's a pure transparency of what is being shared, but the object itself has its own place in the network of shared objects in the scientific ecosystem of research objects via that DOI or that permanent identifier and that citation that really then allows us to pull that data that Daniel was saying and really try to understand where are we, where do we want to go. So this journal started with those initiatives which, like I said, combine clear policies, but not mandates really, policies that encourage and strongly advocate some technological support, obviously provided, so it is easy. Easy is a really important thing for these flourishing to happen, right? That you properly water it, that you properly make it successful. But then the last ingredient is the one I wanted to focus on, because it is those editors that were kind of behind the journal, championing every single paper, going back to the authors when they hadn't shared or when they hadn't properly cited that code, to understand why and to help them do it. With that approach, which again, not scalable, I'm talking sort of here, extremely small kind of orchard. We achieved 100% compliance as of July 2024. All the articles published share their code publicly via a permanent identifier. There's proper credit for that code or data shared via that unique reference, which will accrue its own citations or other metrics of usage. So that story does tell me if you put those ingredients in place, you can achieve it. But back to this discussion, that is not about scale, right? This is not about scale. This is about showing it can be done. And this can perhaps inform behavioral change. This can perhaps inspire and, get some of our stakeholders to really understand that it is possible, it is beneficial, and that we have some examples to pull from.
Yeah, so what I really like you guys are talking about, or from what Daniel said and Eric said, like working at different scales to make these academic practices change and elevate data as a first class research product. And I think we have to work on all these scales to make things really happen in the end. Having the infrastructure publishers can provide to make a requirement or make it possible to do something like credit, right? First, we have to have you can't, when you're submitting a manuscript and it gets accepted, you can't just put in, here are the authors. You have to think about what did they do? What were their roles in this paper? And let us know. So I know PLOS does this. I'm sure there's other publishers that do. But when it's a requirement at the end of the journal, with the end of the submission of the manuscript, and I've already, it's been peer reviewed and it's gone through months of work, like I'm going to put in the work necessary to make that happen at the end. Do I have a question of training there, right? If it's just this extra thing at the end and I've never seen credit before, like I just want to, I'm ticking these boxes to hurry this up as fast as I can, we might end up with a bunch of inaccurate information, which wouldn't necessarily be an improvement. So training is required there. I also liked, Erica, your example of this small editorial group moving things along. I think this is one place where it's really, we have to, I don't know that there's another way to do it to really change behaviors, but working on a small scale and getting people who are in different disciplines interested in these kind of practices and the importance of data and code in the scholarly record. And certainly something we can do at institutions, working in libraries, working on campus. We get to talk to researchers like this one at a time or in small groups about the importance of these things. And it is a slow process, right? That's not, talking to one research group about the importance of data sharing, and here's how you can do it. You can use our repository services. We'll help you find other repositories one at a time. But for researchers who have never done this before, as we saw in Laura's slides, the training is really important. And if they don't know how to do it well or can't figure it out, having people available, whether it's through publishers or through local institutional support, to help them understand how to do this and how to do it well is a really important part, even if it doesn't scale. And it's a good way to get started. You said, Erica, making fertile ground, using fertile ground. Like hopefully some of the work I'm doing here and my colleagues are helping to find those champions in different disciplines to help this kind of thing get started in different disciplinary works areas.
Thanks, Jonathan. So it sounds like, as we presented, people are worried about credit. They think it's too hard. If we can kind of look for solutions for the credit, can make it easy, can start the culture change, and it kind of needs to happen at every level. But I guess I'm wondering your views as to the biggest challenges there. Is it kind of the disconnect between policy and implementation? Is it getting researchers on board? Is it knowing where to put their data? Is it, helping them pass their concerns about why they're not sharing? Interested in perspectives there.
I mean, I can say I think it's all of the above, of course. It's a little bit of everything. Uh, the opportunity, if I may flip the question a little bit to the opportunity from the challenge, is that, within this call, we have representation from different industries that all, cover the scholarly communication landscape. And I think there's a real sense of unity in the end goal, in the value of the end goal and what we want to achieve. So that's a real positive for me, that there's alignment, that there's very few questions to be answered that are still unclear about why this is important, right? I think we've answered most of those questions. We've shown the value of this. So with that opportunity, I think from those challenges that you listed, Laura, I think each of us as stakeholders have perhaps a little bit of a low-hanging fruit opportunity within there and a more challenging aspect, but we are complementary in this. So I'm sure Daniel will talk about, the technical support and the platforms that now exist and how much that has advanced over the last few years. But from our perspective as publishers, I do feel that we, alongside funders that are requiring these sorts of behaviors, can really work together here, because the alignment of a requirement from a funder and a facilitation from the publisher at the time of publication can be hugely effective, because the authors are, whether we like it or not, primed to comply at that time of publication. When they submit an article to the publisher, in their mind, that's still the moment when all these things are going to happen, when they're going to comply with the full sharing of their requirements, when they're going to be thinking about the transparency, or how they assign the DOI and how they talk about those references or those data sets in the paper. So the paper still acts as the big unifier glue, and it's a moment in the researcher life cycle that's still hugely important. Sorry, not impossible, also impossible. And we can take advantage of that, right? And we can align forces, all together to really make sure we're making a meaningful use of that critical time.
Maybe I can add a perspective. I mean, I think Erica makes a good point for me, that platforms have certainly evolved over the last decade. I could make a slightly strong and perhaps slightly controversial statement, but I don't think the problem is a technical one. I mean, obviously, for big projects with petabytes of data and things like that, there remain technical challenges, and I don't want to be insensitive to that. And in certain areas of academic endeavor, there are data sets which can't be made available through various ethical and sensitivity issues. So that makes complete sense. But broadly speaking, apart from those cases, the technology exists to share your data and give it a unique identifier and make sure that it becomes available for others to use and leverage. I think the challenges we have are entirely cultural, and training is a big piece of that. I think another pillar of it, Eric has talked about a little bit, which is around things like making sure that you capture people at the right moment to make sure they do it. I think Jonathan makes an excellent point of capturing it too late and you're going to get terrible data. And I think that's just how the system is built right now. And so this is where training plays an important role. But I think the kind of additional point that I would make is that the evaluative system has not moved on. The evaluative system within research is not set up to make someone a full professor for the curation of a major data resource or even a minor data. This is not part of the standard academic track. You get your professorship because you brought in so much grant money. You get your professorship because you've published in certain journals at certain levels with certain frequency. If you invest your career in being brilliant at data analytics or really showing, the next level of capability in how you can handle data or curate data, this is not a route for you to make full professor right now. And until it becomes a route to make full professor, I think we're going to continue with that 73% of people feeling that they are not getting the credit they deserve for the work that they're doing. And so I think that's the nub of it for me, is this movement that we have to create where people really are recognized for their expertise and skill in working with data, because as we go forward, there will be more and more people doing more and more data work, and we need to be inclusive and make that part of what we value.
Thanks, Daniel. So, we have about 5 minutes left, and my last question was actually, what's one like change you think would move the needle? And it sounds like your answer is researcher assessment needs to be reevaluated. Erica and Jonathan, interested in, a change either on the publisher side or your own side, or that someone else should make, right?
I guess I'll start. So totally plus 1,000 to what Daniel just said. I think we have to have, we have to all agree that, citations on a publication are maybe not the best thing. It's an important aspect, but that the research is reproducible, it's replicable, it's robust, and that we're building on the available sources, like that we care about these things and we find ways to assess these aspects, which I think it's challenging. It's not an easy thing to do. But if we want to see the data and code and other supporting outputs are important, we have to find a way to make it measure that and measure the importance of them. So that's one big thing. I guess on the small thing, like what's one small thing we can do? So I work in an institutional data repository. We're publishing data sets all the time, and getting linkages from our data set to our manuscript and developing all of these linkages when the publications are being created right now is a laborious process. And I don't know how publishers think about this, but it's a really challenging and a time-taking thing where I think we could all coordinate this work way better to get better linkages and more with less trouble linkages to all these different pieces of the research process, from the publication to all the other pieces. And yeah, I'm hoping we can at some point work better in making a better coordinated effort towards that part.
Erica?
Yeah, no, I want to agree with what Daniel and Jonathan said. Really, I do believe that recognizing the value of the diversity of objects is the biggest priority that we have collectively. I think we do need to start our focus going beyond papers and citations. I think that is not sort of really reflecting where science stands at the moment. Science really is built on the existence of these objects, which are really the ingredients for advancing science, not the paper itself. The paper is an inspiration, is a source of information, connections. There's a lot of value in the paper, but it's very limited, right, in itself. So I think really focusing on those objects, making them shine, making them useful, making them linked all together as a network, as Jonathan was saying, so that they can be properly, created as a unit of research in its own right. I think it's the top priority of this time for all of us in the room.
Great. Thanks, Erica. Well, that takes us almost exactly to 30 minutes. So I just want to thank all of you for a really interesting discussion. At this point, I'll stop the recording, and then I think we can look forward to having another discussion with all the attendees in December.